Hi folks, Chuck here again to talk about horror and science fiction books that I love. This time around though, I'm going to be talking about collections that I love, single author collections. I love a good short story. I do love a good novel, but often I find that being a bit time poor, I can't commit myself to reading a novel in any kind of reasonable time. Whereas a collection of short stories, I can pick up, even if there's a gap between having read them, I can read a story, knock it over very, very quickly, enjoy it, pop the book down, pick it up again when I've got the time to read on and I haven't forgotten any of the characters or forgotten the plot or forgotten what point I'm up to. Some of my all-time favourite writing is short stories. They're the ones that tend to live rent-free in my head, particularly when they're horror short stories that really, really get to me. So today we're going to look at a few of the collections that I've loved, some recent, some older. If you know of any of these, if you've read any of these, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think. If you haven't, maybe this will motivate you to go out and read some of these and also look up some of these authors. First of all, Ramsey Campbell. I've spoken of my love for Ramsey Campbell's writing a few times before. He was one of the first authors of adult sort of horror fiction that I read as a 12, 13, 14-year-old. Love his stuff. I've loved pretty much all of his books, both his novels and his collections. But this one in particular, this collection of short stories, has always stuck with me because to me it is essentially Campbell. And by that I mean it taps into, throughout it, exactly what terrifies me about Ramsey Campbell's work, which is that it tends to involve people kind of visiting areas that have been tapped by urban decay, dusty old rooms that haven't been opened for ages, unused, railway station waiting rooms, parks that have been, fallen into kind of disrepair, with people walking through them after night. And into these, there are usually really unpleasant entities that then kind of enact vengeance upon the unfortunate protagonists of Campbell's stories. That to me is prime Campbell. He's also written a lot of Lovecraftian fare and mythos fare and things like that, but this is the stuff that really gets to me. Something I've recently realised also about Campbell's work is that, and it's part of the terror for me, it just took me a long time to put my finger on it, is that there's an almost Japanese sensibility to how the people in these come to be in these situations. In Western ghost stories, generally, the people being taken to task by ghosts or having vengeance and act upon them have done something to deserve it, even if they don't really deserve it. They've transgressed. They're either awful people, or they've murdered someone, or they've wronged someone who then dies and the ghost comes back to get them. Or sometimes it's just a matter of, they've been told not to go into the haunted room and they go into the haunted room. So there's an element of, well, you kind of brought it on yourself. If you've ever watched a Japanese ghost film, you could simply be walking down a road and a ghost will just go, "You're it. I'm coming for you to cut off your feet or kill you or what have you." You don't have to have done anything or gone anywhere you were told not to, or done anything horrible to anyone to apparently, fall under the spell of the ghost, which is terrifying. It's so random, and that's the feeling I get from a lot of Campbell's unfortunate protagonists as well. Not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, wrong place, wrong time, and something comes at them. And for me, that's terrifying, the randomness. But yeah, I can never say enough good things about Ramsey Campbell's work, both long fiction and short fiction. But the short fiction for me is the stuff that really, really, stabs me where it hurts. And I love it for that. Robert R. McCammon, huge fan of Robert, as with Ramsey Campbell, huge fan of Robert R. McCammon's short work and long work. This is, I think I'm right in saying, his one collection, and I love it. There's a lot of amazing stories in here, collected for the first time. And indeed, I should sort of probably pause and say that most of the collections I'm going to show you are original collections, in that the contents at the time that the book came out had not been collected before. There's a couple of exceptions, but in most cases it's an original collection. There are some cracking tales in here. At least one of them was turned into an episode of the 80s Twilight Zone series, Night Crawls, I think that was, which is terrifying. But there's some amazing stuff in here. There's one called Makeup, which involves someone coming into possession of a fabled makeup kit owned by an actor who is very much modelled on Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces in early horror films, who had this makeup kit where he could make himself look like anything. And it turns out there's a very damn good reason why he could. And of course it gets used for all the wrong purposes and horrible things ensue. There's one called, I think, Something Passed By, which involves a sort of a worldwide reversal of some of the laws of physics through some presumably astronomical event that has done such weird things to the world, and how people are coping or not coping with that. There's another one called, and I want to quote this one correctly, He'll Come Knocking at Your Door, which is that old, it starts off with that old favourite of horror, which is the family that moves into a new location and discovers there's something terrible going on in the local town. In this case, it's a town where everyone seems to do really, really, really well for themselves. And certainly the family that's moved there in this story has, suddenly come by great fortune. It turns out there's a price to be paid. And if you don't pay the price, horrible things ensue. But they're all crackers. I definitely recommend to anyone to go out and grab a copy of this. I've got this reading copy. I've also got, as I've shown in a previous, TikTok, that I've got a signed hardback copy of it because I just love it so much. Bob Franklin, Under Stones. For Australians, most Australians know Bob Franklin as a comedian and comic actor. I'd be surprised if many people outside of Australia know him, but he writes really unsettling, sort of urban horror stories. They're often, how do I describe them? They're often sort of set against the mundane, the ordinary everyday, and then just a note of creepiness and wrongness creeps in. It's very, very subtle. They're very, very good, and they really get under your skin. And I would certainly recommend to anyone to nip out and buy a collection, because there's a couple of them, of the horror stories of Bob Franklin. They're not even sort of pushed as being horror. They're just sort of out there. And I think the thinking being that because Bob Franklin is quite well known, to Australians, people would sort of go, oh, great, let's see what he's written. But they're definitely horror. Absolutely fantastic. Another Aussie author who is very sadly no longer with us, a good mate of mine, Paul Haines, Slice of Life. This is about as close to extreme horror as you can get without actually being extreme horror. There's no sort of in-your-face gore generally. There's no in-your-face sort of violence. But a lot of these stories in here revolve around really toxic masculinity and misogyny. Yeah, if you've not read any Paul Haines, I'm not sure what of his is still in print, to be honest. But well worth tracking down, particularly if you like stuff that is really, really uncomfortable. You won't walk away kind of feeling happy you read it or sort of satisfied about it. You'll be feeling unpleasant, but in the best possible way. And finally, for this video at least, the ghost stories of M.R. James. M.R. James is, I think, quite simply one of the best authors of ghost stories ever. Ghosts in his stories are malevolent. They are out to do harm, sometimes with a bit of reason, mostly not. As I've said, a bit like Ramsey Campbell's entities. You don't necessarily have to have done anything, or at least done anything that you would consider bad, to be in the firing line of the creatures that inhabit these stories. Do yourself a favour if you love a good horror story, if you love a good ghost story, these are some of the best. So yeah, please run out, buy some of these, or if you've already bought them and read them, let me know what you thought. I'm always interested to hear from people with similar opinions or indeed opposing opinions. And we'll do it again soon.